Hi, everybody. The topic for this mini lecture is political parties and interest groups. We talk a lot about political parties in the United States. You obviously know about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And we also sometimes mention interest groups. But there are differences between those things, and I just wanted to make sure that we all know what are those actors and what do they do. So I want you I want to ask you first if you know what political parties are. And again, this is where you can pause this video for a second and think with yourself, do I know what political parties are? Can I think of some examples? Obviously, I already said in the United States, the Democratic Party and Republican Party, but do you know of any other? And also, do you belong to a political party? When you register to vote in the United States, they ask you if you want to be affiliated with a specific party. So maybe some of you have identified with a party, maybe not. That's fine. You can nonetheless vote and be active participant in the political process. But if you have identified with a party, that also doesn't mean that you always have to belong to that party. You can change your affiliation or be non-affiliated at some point. These are all valid decisions of a citizen. Also, importantly, is that you can be registered, say, for the Democratic Party, but in the elections go into the polling booth and decide to vote Republican. That is, there's nothing that makes you committed to vote to one party or the other just because you are affiliated or even donated money to a specific political party. Now, we call political parties linkage institutions. And they are linkage institutions because they link the people and their elected representatives. So that's what political parties are. In political parties, we can find like-minded people that are sharing ideas and position on political, social, economic, or other topics. That doesn't mean that everybody think exactly the same about everything, but like-minded people. If we go to our discussion of ideologies, and while there is no pure or complete overlap between an ideology and a political party, you could find in a certain political party people who lean one way or the other on the ideological continuum because they are like-minded. Now, what why do we need this linkage institution? Why do people, voters, citizens need the political parties? Some of the reasons is that political parties allow us to get information or to take actions on the things that we care about. So if you think about it, if you wanted to be a fully informed citizen and then to take action on whatever you care about, you would have to pretty much quit your job, don't take care of your kids, and be all the time consuming news, going through different ideas, sitting in debate, and forming your positions, and then go out and do what you think you can do. Political parties and interest groups, as linkage institutions, help us digest the information. They collect the information and they give us information from a trusted source, the political party or the interest group. And then they can help us to channel our resources for action in a much more efficient and effective way. Let's focus on political parties specifically. And this is a definition that a political party is a political organization that is seeking to influence government policy by nominating candidates and trying to get them into political office. Parties often promote an ideology or vision stated in a written platform with a specific goals. Parties tries to form coalition among disparate interests. So let's break this apart. The one very important thing about political parties is that political parties, by definition, try to get candidates into the government, into elected official positions. So that's how they influence government. That's how they try to influence policy making, by getting the people who are like-minded into those positions. So they are the ones who are vetting would-be candidates and then helping them run campaigns and get their name out there and support them with different resources. So when on elections day, we, the voters, can come in and hopefully vote for their candidate, get them into a political office. Now, political parties have what we call a party platform, and this is where you can find all the different positions on policies, on specific issues and topics. So, what does the Republican Party think about immigration? What does the Democratic Party think about poverty? What do Republicans think about taxes, etc., etc., etc. All of that information is in the in the party platform. And then what parties are doing, knowing that no two people think exactly alike, maybe two people do, but not, 200,000 or 2 million people think exactly alike, they try to find those bridges and coalitions between people with different interests to get them all under the umbrella of the party. Sometimes it's with compromise, sometimes it's with kind of trade-offs. We'll take care of this policy if we get, say, a union to support us. Maybe we take, maybe we also focus on issues that are related to unions, etc. So those were political parties. And interest groups also try to influence policy making, but they do it differently. They link the people to the government by lobbyists, by pushing their agenda, by education campaign, by again lobbying the elected officials and trying to get them to push for whatever policy the interest group is interested in. So they're trying to influence policy by influencing the people that are in government, but they do not try to get candidates into government. And that's the main difference between political parties and interest groups. Other things that we can tell about political parties is that usually political party in those platforms deal with or have opinions or ideas for policy about different issues or a broad range of issues, including immigration, healthcare, the economy, gun laws, the democratic rules, voting rights, the environment, and more and more and more and more. And then every 4 years, they put it in the party platform. And that carries through the next presidential election cycle. So, like we said, political parties are focusing on getting candidates and then getting them ready to win elections. And when they are able to win election, this is how the party gets more power. In the United States, we can talk about the Republicans and the Democrats, and sometimes they put new candidates, sometimes they put incumbent candidates, and sometimes they decide on who the candidate is going to be through primary elections. Now, you can be part of a party or support a party, like I said, if you register for the party, but also if you don't register for the party, you can still be a supporter of one party or another. And then the parties build an agenda, and that agenda serves the politicians as a guide. Those who were elected into government, that's their guide. That's what their expectations are for them to vote one way or another. And it also serves the people by giving them information and um, and the resources that they need in order to support different candidates and also different to understand different policy choices. As we already said, in the United States, we have a two-party system, and that means that while there are other parties that could form and try to run candidates, and from time to time we see those, we tend to gravitate towards two parties, and that has to do with our electoral system and our the way that we conduct elections in the United States. That doesn't really encourage or allow for more than two parties to flourish. So other countries that have a two-party system, the UK is another good example, Jamaica, but there are a number of those, and that's the system that we have here. But that's not the only party system that you find around the world. There are single-party systems such as China or North Korea. Mainly, those are relics of communism. And those are obviously the elections, if they are held, not always held, but even if they are held, they're not free and not fair. There's only one party that does the same thing. The party, even without the elections and the input from the population, in a single party system, is the one that finds the candidates, vet them, get them ready to serve in government, and they support the candidates and as get them into the government as officials. And also the party sets the agenda. So even in a single party system, we see some of those party mechanisms at work. The two-party system we talked about in the United States, the the advantages of a two-party system is that it's easier for people to gather information and the parties are more inclusive. But at the same time, there are some minority groups or very specific groups that do not find themselves represented in the parties. And also, the parties tend to consolidate around a specific ideology or way of thinking more so than in a multi-party system. Some of the examples for multi-party system that I gave here, Germany, Brazil, New Zealand, you can find anywhere between 3 to 5 to 7, 8, 9, 10, or 15 different parties that are all represented in government. And on election day, people vote for the party of their choice. And this is how you get many different parties. And what happened is that in order to govern, in order to be the ones who elect the head of state or be the ones who sit in cabinet and make policy and make decisions, they have to make coalitions and they have to bring more compromise and negotiations into the process. Let's look at some of those examples. Here are some of the leading parties in Germany, right? You see here 7 parties that are represented in the government: the Christian Democratic Union, the Christian Social Union, Social Democratic Party of Germany, Free Democratic Party, Alliance 90 or the Green Party, the Left, and the Alternative for Germany. All of those were able to get into the Bundestag. In Brazil, right, we see more of those parties. if you're a voter, there are just more choices. So when we go to vote here in the United States and the candidates are either from the Democratic or Republican Party, I am sure that some of you are like, oh, I can't see myself supporting any of them. I don't like this party. I don't like that party. Maybe I'm just not going to vote. Or I'm going to vote to a third party candidate, but that candidate is very unlikely to get in and influence anything in government. In a multi-party system, you just have more choices. There are parties that represent more broad issues, and then there are specific parties. The party for the old, the party for the young, the party for those who just focus on healthcare, the party of those who really focus on education, etc. So there's just more choices for voters. We tend to see much more peaceful transition of power because the transition of power is based on this negotiation and building of a coalition. And so it's more inclusive. It's not so much, say, here in the United States, and even if we put January 6th aside, many times after the election, we have about 50% of the electoral disappointed because a lot of our elections are decided in about 52% of for the winner, 48% for the loser. That means that 48% of the population is dissatisfied at that point. In a multi-party system, more people could find themselves in and less people find themselves out, and that's how you get a more peaceful transition of power. There's also more representation for different minorities because you could have a party that represents a very specific narrow minority. And because of that, because it's kind of closer to the people and their different interests, and because people can feel more part of the process. When I support the Democratic Party, I may support one or two issues that I'm really for them, but also as part of my support to the Democratic Party, I also support other things that I don't really identify with. And so maybe I don't really feel part of it. But if we live in a multi-party system and I support a party with much narrower interests, then I can feel more engaged and would like maybe to support and participate even more. We do see in multi-party systems an active opposition, again, because of this idea that um, they can topple a government very quickly before the next elections. If the government is based on a coalition and it doesn't satisfy the coalition, then it would fall and we go back to election. And so the opposition can see itself in and out of the coalition, and so it's much more active than just voicing objection for 4 years. And so the people who are in power, because they rely on different parties to hold power, they have to all the time negotiate and compromise, and therefore they cannot really consolidate power and move forward. So coalition building and this idea of thinking about all those different interests that are represented by all the different parties get us to more moderate positions and a lot more inclusive government for all people involved. Obviously, there's also disadvantages. The formation of the government could be very challenging, can take a lot of time, and sometimes a representative that looked that they'll be able to build a government and a coalition fails in doing so. So we have to go into another round of election. The coalition that was formed is sometimes or many times very fragile. It could be unstable. Sometimes they rely on one vote in parliament, which means that that party that holds that one swing vote could topple the government at any given point. And so that brings a little bit more instability into parliament and government in the process. Because there's a lot more parties, elections are more expensive. And remember that we said that one of the big advantages of parties, and especially in a two-party system, is that they do the information gathering for us and they help us make decisions by giving us kind of half-digested um, information. But in a multi-party system, with all of those different parties voting for our resources and our vote, voters can get confused. And again, it's a lot of work to be an educated voter. We do see sometimes pattern of kind of tribal voting where candidates would run on a religious affiliation or ethnic affiliation, and therefore, if you belong to that group, you are expected to vote to that party, and that brings division and fragmentation in the party, in the party. And then because of all of those compromised and wiggling and dealing, multi-party systems seem to sometimes be focused more on the politics and less on the policy. So let's look specifically on the advantages and disadvantages of a two-party system, such as the one that we have here in the United States. So parties have to appeal to more people. And because of that, their messages, kind of by definition, have to be more inclusive. And we have to kind of try and find where the majority is and appeal to the majority. So there's less of that tribalism risk in a two-party system. No need to build coalition, meaning that once elections are done, we know who won the elections most of the time, and they can take power and run the government right away. There's less of that wiggling and dealing in the process, building towards the government being sworn in. So it's easier to build, and then it's easier to support and maintain and sustain the government. And for the voters, again, it's easier because there's two parties. They build those packages. I'm the Democratic Party. This is what I believe in. I'm the Republican Party. This is what I believe in. Where do you find yourself, or where are you closer to? And this is it. However, at the same time, we tend in a two-party system to move away from the center because there is no incentive for compromise. Once the Democrat won the elections, they can lead the elections or they can lead the policies towards their agenda and vice versa with the Republican Party. Um, there is less choice for voters, right? So there are limited ideas and limited choices when you come to vote on elections day. Like I said, there are advantages to this same argument, but there are also disadvantages. And my personal choice is more unlikely to be represented because we tend um, to vote party line. I don't know how many of you have were able to already go and vote in these past few election cycles, but you have party lines. So while we do vote for individual representatives, they are organized for us on party line, and a lot of times people tend to vote party line. So maybe I learned and I got myself educated on the presidential candidates or the congressional candidates, but down the ballot with other candidates, I tend to vote, or many people tend to vote party line as opposed to um, break that affiliation. Party platforms, these agendas or policy suggestions of what is it that we're going to do once we get into government tend to be calculated according to what would be most appealing for the voters as opposed to what would best serve the country. And then you kind of have to run. If you are a candidate, if you want to run for government, you have to be affiliated with a party in a two-party system. You cannot really get away from that because the cost and the coverage that you get when you're affiliated with the cost is lower. When you're affiliated with the party, the coverage that you get is much higher. If you try to do it alone, it's not it's not it's not going to be as easy. And then finally, we tend to find pattern voting. So we kind of know that New York is blue and Texas is red. And that makes people feel that my vote doesn't count. If I live in New York and I'm a Republican and I really support the Republican Party, what does sense that it makes to me to go and vote if anyways the Democratic Party is going to win in New York? My vote is kind of a waste. Vice versa in Texas. If I believe that uh, that Texas is going to go red, then there is no incentives for me to vote if I'm a Democratic voter, and that is because of our system um, of the winner takes all. All right, let's move our focus into interest group. And like I said, there's still representative interest of people. But here, unlike parties, interest group focus on specific issues, one or two specific issues. And they are not part of the electoral process. We are not voting for interest groups. They don't put a platform together. So they're just not part of that. So when you think about interest groups, think about the NRA, the National Rifle Association, or a civil rights group, or human rights group, or environmental groups. Those are interest groups. They're focused on one or two issues, and they're not part of the electoral process, and they don't find and run candidates to win office. But they do try to impact policy by lobbying elected officials and government agencies. So they have people who are lobbyists. Usually they used to be lawyers or they used to serve in government and they know the people and they know the system and they wine and dine and go and make arguments and bring information to the table. And this is how they try to influence the process. Now, interest groups, who is a member of an interest group? All of us can be. People that have similar ideas on specific issues and they come together to put pressure on government. They can do that by calling their representatives or by protesting or by donating money. Okay, and they can campaign for specific positions and therefore kind of bring the message that there are people who care about it. Sometimes, elected officials, they try to deal with many different issues. An interest group can be the supplier of information, can be the one that brings up all the information, does the research, and help elected officials in making their decisions, but they also try to influence. Now we find labor unions, business groups, professional groups, doctors, lawyers, students groups, corporations, social groups, specific, like I said, gun laws, minimum wage, environmental. Sometimes there are foreign countries who um, form interest groups that then lobby our governments as well. Now, we do know that between our elected officials, our bureaucrats, and those interest groups, we do can talk about this iron triangle, this idea that interest groups are part of the process, even though they are not part of the electoral process, they are part of the policy making process and they are influential. Recently in the United States, we see this creation and proliferation of PACs or political action committees, and those are organizations that were created to raise and spend money for candidates. They are not part of the party, but they are affiliated usually with the candidate or a party. And here are some of the rules about PACs. They can raise and give up to $5,000 to a candidate or a committee for each elections, 15,000 for a political party per year, 5,000 to another PAC. And then they can have unlimited expenditure independently of a candidate or a political party. And this is where you see campaign ads that at the end says paid for by this and that PAC. That means that they are, they raise the money, they spend the money for the candidates, and this is kind of a way for candidates in the United States to go around campaign, election and campaign financial rules. And then we have super PACs that can raise unlimited fund and spend unlimited independent expenditure only. So they cannot do direct donations to candidates or parties, but they can spend as much as they want for a specific goals. And one of the main court case related to this one is the Citizens United that you probably heard about that before, which created this idea that corporations are people, and because of that, corporation can give money to super PACs, and super PACs can then spend that money. So, are interest group good or not good? Well, we can argue that they are good because that's pluralism. This idea that we can hear all different groups and no one group will dominate the political discourse. We are increasing more opportunities for political participation, even though we have a two-party system, through the use or through the operation of interest groups. At the same time, some people can say, no, interest groups are not good. They're nice in theory, but in practice and in the United States, some of those groups are very, very powerful, and that goes down to money again. They are represented the elites, they are represented the rich, because the operation of interest groups and lobbying is expensive and it relies on money. Who represents the poor? The poor cannot donate money, they cannot give contributions, so who represents them? This is less about education and much more about political lobbying and kind of trying to compete over power. And this is why people say that interest groups are actually hurting our political process and not helping it. So here's a summary of the similarities between political parties and interest groups. We have individuals with common ideas and goals that are getting organized. They try to influence the policy making and bring political, economic, and social change. They use lobbying technique to gain support for people or to gain the support of either the constituents, the people, or gain the support of officials. And they use campaigns, they raise money, they raise awareness, education, etc. And then they allow citizens to better understand the issues and make informed decisions. However, there are also differences between them. Parties try to achieve power and therefore they try to win elections. Interest groups do not. Parties are more flexible because they try to win majorities, and interest groups are more focused on their narrow interests, and therefore they are much less flexible. Members of parties can have various ideas on any given issue, but interest groups members of parties can have various ideas on a given issue. Interest groups can arise within a political party. And interest groups focus on one issue and one position towards that issue. The party size matter less than the size of the interest group, in their ability to achieve goals. The larger interest groups influence elections much better than the smaller one, not just elections, policy making, and the smaller ones. So that was our review of political power, parties, and interest groups. Thank you for listening.